What you're about to hear cost one man everything: his reputation, his family's approval, and a wedding worth $500,000. And it all started with a plate of jollof rice. Emmanuel Okafor was the richest man in Lagos. He had it all: the mansion, the cars, the name everyone whispered at parties. But one afternoon, this man walked into his own engagement ceremony. 200 guests, imported champagne, a fiancée in a designer gown, and he said 6 words that made the entire room go silent. He said, "I am not marrying her." Then he turned around and walked out. The woman he chose instead was standing on a street corner 3 miles away, selling food from a metal tray. Nobody understood. Nobody except Emmanuel, because he had spent 3 weeks pretending to be someone he wasn't. And what he had found during those 3 weeks broke open everything he thought he knew about love. Good to have you here, friends. Please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Tell us where you're joining from in the comments. Atlanta, London, maybe Ghana or Barbados? We're curious. Now let me take you back. Pay attention to what happens next, because this is where everything changes. Emmanuel Okafor was 44 years old. He was a broad-shouldered man, not tall but solid, the kind of man who filled a doorway when he walked through it. He had a square jaw, deep brown skin, and a short beard that was going gray at the edges. His eyes were sharp, always watching, always thinking, always measuring. He had a habit of pressing his lips together and nodding slowly before he spoke, like he was tasting the words before he let them out. People found that intimidating. That was fine with Emmanuel. He didn't need people to feel comfortable around him. He needed them to take him seriously. He owned a construction company called Okafor & Sons Development. Started it with his father 20 years ago in a small office on Victoria Island with 1 desk, 1 phone, and 2 folding chairs. His father was a man named Chief Patrick Okafor, a bricklayer from Onitsha who came to Lagos in 1975 with nothing but a bag of clothes and a Bible. Patrick had built walls with his bare hands for 10 years before he saved enough money to start his own business. Emmanuel grew up watching his father come home every evening with cement dust in his hair and calluses on his palms, and he swore to himself that he would build something bigger, something that would make the old man proud. And he did. Now the company built hotels, shopping complexes, and apartment towers all over West Africa. They had offices in Lagos, Accra, and Abidjan. Emmanuel had over 300 employees. His face had been on the cover of business magazines twice. He drove a white Range Rover with tinted windows, and he lived in a house in Ikoyi that had a swimming pool, a generator room the size of a small apartment, and a front gate so tall you couldn't see the house from the road. His father had died 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. And Emmanuel had stood at the graveside in a black suit and made one promise: "I will make you proud, Papa." He had kept that promise in business, but in every other part of his life, he had failed. And he knew it. That was the thing that kept him up at night. That was the weight he carried in his chest every morning when he woke up in that big, silent house. The house was beautiful. White walls, high ceilings, cool tile floors that felt good under bare feet in the Lagos heat. There was a large living room with leather sofas and a television mounted on the wall that was bigger than some people's dining tables. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that the cook, a quiet woman named Blessing, kept spotless every day. The house smelled like air freshener and floor polish, and in the mornings, like fresh bread and fried eggs, because Blessing started cooking at 6 o'clock sharp every single day. But for all its beauty, the house felt stiff. Everything was in its place. The cushions were always straight. The remote controls were always lined up on the glass coffee table. There were no children's toys on the floor, no music playing from another room, no laughter echoing down the hallway. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of generators from the neighboring compounds. Emmanuel had lived in that house for 5 years, and it still didn't feel like home. It felt like a showroom. Something you walked through and admired but never really lived in. Now, Emmanuel's mother was a woman named Chief Mrs. Adeze Okafor. Everyone called her Mama Okafor. She was 69 years old, heavy-set, with a voice that could carry across a football field. She wore elaborate wrappers and jelly head ties to every occasion, and she owned enough gold jewelry to open a small shop. Mama Okafor was a force. She had opinions about everything: what Emmanuel ate, who Emmanuel hired, where Emmanuel went to church, and most importantly, who Emmanuel should marry. She had been telling him to settle down since he turned 30. For 14 years, she had been parading women in front of him like a general reviewing troops. And for 14 years, Emmanuel had politely, and sometimes not so politely, said no. That is, until Mama Okafor found Vivian. Vivian Adeyemi was 31 years old, tall, stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room and made other women sit up straighter. She had been a model in her 20s, runway shows in Johannesburg, magazine covers in London, fashion weeks in Milan. She had long legs, high cheekbones, perfect skin, and a smile that belonged on a billboard. She came from a wealthy family. Her father owned a chain of hotels in the South, and her mother was a retired judge. Vivian was, by every measure that Mama Okafor cared about, perfect. And Emmanuel, well, Emmanuel was tired of fighting. He was 44. His friends were married. His business partners had families. Even Marcus, his site foreman, had just had his third child. Emmanuel looked around at his big empty house and thought, maybe Mama is right. Maybe it's time. Maybe love isn't something you feel. Maybe it's something you decide. So he said yes. He agreed to marry Vivian. The engagement party was planned for 3 weeks later. 200 guests, a 5-star hotel ballroom, a 12-piece band, imported champagne, and a cake so tall it needed its own table. Mama Okafor was in heaven. Vivian was in heaven. The whole of Lagos society was buzzing. Emmanuel Okafor, the most eligible bachelor in the city, was finally getting married. But Emmanuel didn't feel like a man about to get married. He felt like a man about to sign a contract. And that is the thing about settling for something that looks right on the outside. It can fool everyone around you, but it cannot fool the thing inside your chest that knows the difference between a decision and a feeling. Pay attention to what happens next. It was a Friday afternoon, 2.5 weeks before the engagement party. Emmanuel was driving himself, no driver, no Range Rover. He had taken a small black Toyota from the company fleet, the kind of car nobody would look at twice. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had told his assistant he was visiting a project site in Lekki. That was a lie. Emmanuel was going to Yaba. He didn't know exactly why. He just knew that for the past 3 days, he had felt something sitting on his chest. A heaviness, a restlessness, something that wouldn't let him breathe. He kept thinking about his father. His father, who had married his mother not because she was beautiful or wealthy or connected, but because she had brought him a plate of food when he was a struggling bricklayer and nobody else would give him the time of day. His father used to say, "Emmanuel, a woman who feeds you when you have nothing. That is a woman who will stand by you when you have everything." So Emmanuel drove to Yaba. He parked the car on a side street near the market, and he started walking. The market was loud and alive. The sound of traders calling prices, generators humming, music pouring out of small shops, motorcycles honking their way through the narrow lanes. The air smelled like fried plantain and diesel fuel, and the sharp sweetness of overripe fruit. The ground was uneven, cracked concrete and red dirt and puddles from last night's rain. Emmanuel walked through it all with his cap low and his hands in his pockets, and for the first time in months, nobody looked at him twice. Nobody called him Oga. Nobody opened a door for him. Nobody was trying to sell him anything or impress him or ask for a favor. He was just a man in jeans, and it felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a room. That's when he saw her. She was standing beside a wooden table near the entrance to a side alley. The table was covered with aluminum trays and plastic containers. She had a large pot of jollof rice, a tray of fried chicken, small bags of pepper sauce, and a stack of paper plates. She was maybe in her late 20s, 27, 28. She was not tall. She was not thin. She had round cheeks and full lips and dark eyes that sparkled like they had just heard a joke. Her hair was covered in a simple scarf tied at the back. She wore a faded Ankara blouse and a plain wrapper tied at her waist. Her feet were in rubber slippers. And she was laughing. She was laughing with a customer, an old man in a paint-stained shirt who was counting coins from his pocket. She was saying, "Baba, just take the food. You can pay me next time." The old man protested. She waved him off. "Next time, Baba. Go and eat." The old man smiled, took the plate, and shuffled away. And she turned to the next customer without missing a beat. Emmanuel stood across the street and watched. He didn't know why. Something about the way she moved, fast, warm, certain, made him stop. Something about the way she had given that old man food without hesitation, without drama, without making it seem like charity. She did it like it was the most natural thing in the world. He crossed the street. He walked to her table. She looked up at him and said, "Yes, Olga, what can I get you?" "Jollof rice," Emmanuel said, "and chicken." She smiled. 1,000 naira. Sit anywhere." She pointed to a wooden bench against the wall. Emmanuel sat down. She brought him a paper plate piled high with rice, orange-red, fragrant, with the bottom slightly burned the way the best jollof always is. The grains were separate, not sticky, and you could see the tomato paste and the Scotch bonnet peppers cooked deep into every bite. A piece of chicken on top, golden, crispy skin, tender meat that fell off the bone. A small bag of pepper sauce on the side, thick, dark red, the kind that makes your nose run and your eyes water and your mouth beg for more. He looked at the plate. Then he looked at her. She was already back at her table, serving the next person, wiping the counter with a rag, calling out to a woman walking past, "Auntie, come and eat! I made extra rice today." Like the whole market was her family, and she was inviting everyone to dinner. Emmanuel took a bite, and something happened. Something small and quiet and impossible to explain to anyone who wasn't sitting on that bench at that moment. The food was good, really good, better than anything Blessing made at home, better than any restaurant on Victoria Island where a plate of rice cost 5,000 naira and came with a cloth napkin and a waiter who called you sir. But it wasn't just the taste, it was the feeling. Sitting on a wooden bench with a paper plate on his knees and market noise all around him, and sweat on the back of his neck, and nobody in the whole world knowing his name or caring about his bank account. He felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been pulled tight for years, like a rope tied too hard around a box. It loosened, just a little, just enough for him to take a full breath for the first time and he couldn't remember how long. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. But Emmanuel had no idea what was coming. For 3 days, Emmanuel returned to the same spot in Yaba. He wore the same plain clothes, jeans, t-shirt, baseball cap. He drove the same small black Toyota. He parked on the same side street. And he sat on the same wooden bench, eating from the same paper plate, watching Ada work. On the second day, he arrived early, before 8 o'clock, and watched Ada set up. She came from the direction of the main road, pushing a wooden cart loaded with pots and trays and bags of rice. She pushed it alone. No helper, no assistant. Just her, in her rubber slippers, leaning her weight into the handles, navigating around puddles and potholes and parked motorcycles. She set up the table herself, unfolding the legs, laying out the trays, lighting the small kerosene burner she used to keep the food warm. She did all of this in about 20 minutes, without rushing, without complaining, humming a hymn under her breath the entire time. Her name was Adeze, but everyone in the market called her Ada. She was 28 years old. She had a round face that made her look younger, especially when she smiled, which was often. But if you looked closely, if you looked the way Emmanuel was learning to look, you could see the tiredness around her eyes. Not the kind that comes from one bad night, the kind that builds up over years, the kind that comes from carrying more than one person should carry. Ada had been selling food in this market since she was 19 years old. That was the year her mother died. Her mother, Chidinma, had sold food in the same market, at this same spot, on this same corner, for 15 years. She died of typhoid fever on a Thursday afternoon, in a hospital bed that didn't have clean sheets, in a ward that didn't have enough fans. Ada was holding her hand when it happened. Her brother Chidi was 13. Her sister Grace was 7. Their father had left when Grace was a baby, walked out one afternoon and never came back. No explanation. No forwarding address. Just gone. So at 19, Ada became everything. Mother, father, provider. She took over her mother's food stall. She cooked the recipes her mother had taught her. The jollof rice, the pepper soup, the fried plantain, the chin-chin. She woke up at 4:30 every single morning, 7 days a week. She walked to the market in the dark. She bought ingredients. She cooked. She served. She cleaned. She counted money. She walked home in the evening with aching feet and aching hands, and did it all again the next day. Her brother Chidi was now 22. He was studying mechanical engineering at a polytechnic in Benin on a partial scholarship. Ada paid the rest. Every month she put money in an envelope, took it to the bus park, and gave it to a driver heading to Benin City. The money came from the stall, from the same paper plates and metal trays and 1,000 naira portions that she served every day. Her sister Grace was 16, smart, quiet, serious about school in a way that made Ada proud and terrified at the same time. Proud because Grace was going to be something. Terrified because Ada knew how much it cost to turn potential into possibility. Grace's school fees were due every term. Her textbooks cost money, her uniform cost money. The extra lessons she needed in mathematics cost money. And all of that money came from Ada's wooden table on a dusty street corner in Yaba. Ada had no savings. She had no bank account. She had a small metal box under her bed where she kept cash, sorted into labeled envelopes. Chidi school, Grace school, rent, market, emergency. The emergency envelope was almost always empty. She lived in a face me, I face you apartment in Mushin, a long building divided into single rooms, with a shared bathroom and a shared kitchen, and walls so thin you could hear your neighbor's television like it was your own. Her room was small, just big enough for a bed, a table, and a plastic wardrobe. She shared it with Grace. The ceiling leaked when it rained, a slow, steady drip that landed in a bucket Ada kept in the corner. But the room was always clean. The bed was always made. Grace's school uniform was always washed and ironed and hanging on the back of the door. And there was always food. No matter how tight things got, no matter how many envelopes came up short, Ada made sure there was always food. Emmanuel learned all of this over 3 days, not by asking questions directly, but by listening. Ada talked while she cooked. She talked while she served. She talked to her customers like they were her family, asking about their children, their jobs, their aches and pains. She remembered names. She remembered who liked extra pepper and who couldn't eat onions, and who always paid late but always paid eventually. She knew which taxi drivers worked the early shift, and which market women had new babies, and which school children needed extra rice because their parents couldn't afford breakfast. She had a way of making every person who sat at her bench feel seen, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way, in the way that matters. On the 3rd day, after the lunch rush had slowed, Emmanuel was sitting on the bench eating his plate of rice, his 6th plate in 3 days, and he said, "Ada, can I ask you something?" "Ask," she said, wiping the counter with a rag. "Why do you give food to people who can't pay?" Ada stopped wiping. She looked at him like the question was strange, like he had asked her why she breathed or why she blinked. "Because they're hungry," she said. "What else am I supposed to do? Watch them walk away with nothing?" She shook her head. "My mother used to say, if your pot has food and your neighbor's pot is empty, then God gave you that food for 2. She went back to wiping. That's it. That's the whole reason. Emmanuel didn't say anything. He just sat there with his paper plate on his knees and felt something click in his chest, like a lock turning, like a door opening into a room he hadn't known was there. He looked at Ada, at her faded blouse and her rubber slippers and her rough hands and her bright, tired eyes, and he thought, this is what my father was talking about. This is what real looks like. On the 4th day, he told her the truth. He waited until the afternoon rush was over. The last customer had left. Ada was packing up her trays, scrubbing pots with a sponge, humming a church song under her breath. Emmanuel walked over and said, "Ada, I need to tell you something." She looked up. "What is it?" "My name is not Michael." He had given her a fake name on the first day. "My name is Emmanuel Okafor." Ada stared at him. Then she burst out laughing. "Okafor as in Okafor and Sons? The construction people?" She was still laughing.
"You're joking." "I'm not." She stopped laughing. She looked at his face, at his eyes, and she saw that he was serious. "Why would a man like you come here and eat from my table?" she asked quietly. "Because the food is good," Emmanuel said. "And because you gave an old man a free plate of rice without thinking twice. And because for 3 days, you've treated me like a normal person. Not like a wallet, not like an opportunity, like a human being." Ada was quiet for a long time. She wiped her hands on a cloth. She looked at the ground, then at the pots, then at him. She didn't look impressed. She didn't look excited. She didn't look like a woman who had just won the lottery, which is how most people would have looked if a man worth billions told them he had been eating at their table for 4 days. She looked worried. She looked like a woman who had been through enough to know that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. "So, what now?" she said. "I don't know," Emmanuel said honestly. "I don't have a plan. I don't have a speech.
I just know that I feel more like myself sitting on that bench eating your rice than I do anywhere else in my entire life. And I don't want to lose that." Ada looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "You should go home, Emmanuel. Think about what you're saying. You don't know me. You don't know my life. You don't know what it means to be a street vendor's, whatever you're trying to be. Go home. Sleep on it. And if you still feel this way tomorrow, come back and eat your rice like a normal person." Emmanuel smiled. It was the first real smile he had given anyone in weeks. "I'll be here at 8. Bring your own water," Ada said. "I'm not running a charity." Then she paused. "Well, I am. But not for billionaires." And that single moment set off a chain of events that nobody could stop. Emmanuel went home that night and sat alone in his living room. The air conditioner hummed. The cushions were straight. The remote controls were lined up. And he looked around at all of it. The expensive paintings, the marble floors, the leather sofa nobody sat on, and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then he closed his eyes and thought about Ada's bench, the cracked wood, the smell of jollof rice and Scotch bonnet pepper, the sound of her laughing, the feeling of being nobody. And he felt everything. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling, listening to the air conditioner cycle on and off. His phone sat on the nightstand with 37 unread messages about the engagement party. Flower arrangements, seating charts, band playlists. He didn't open a single one. He called Vivian the next morning. He asked her to meet for lunch, just the two of them, no friends, no family. They sat in a quiet restaurant on the island, the kind with cloth napkins and water that costs more than Ada makes in a day. Air-conditioned, quiet jazz playing from hidden speakers. A waiter who called them sir and ma and kept their glasses full without being asked. Vivian was beautiful, as always. Hair done in long braids that must have taken 4 hours. Nails painted a deep red. A designer dress that fit like it was sewn onto her body. She ordered a Caesar salad and a sparkling water. She checked her phone twice before the food arrived, once more while she was eating. "Vivian," Emmanuel said, "can I ask you something?" She looked up from her phone. "Of course. Do you love me?" She blinked, set her phone face down on the table. "Of course I do. What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Why do you love me? Tell me why." Vivian set down her fork. She tilted her head and gave him the smile, the one he had seen in her photographs, the one that belonged on magazine covers. It was practiced. It was perfect. It was empty. "Because you're a good man, Emmanuel. You're successful. You're respected. People admire you. We look good together. We make sense." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "We make sense together." Emmanuel nodded slowly. He looked at her hand on his. Her fingers were long and smooth and perfect, and he thought about Ada's hands, rough, cracked, strong from years of cooking and scrubbing and carrying. Hands that had done real work. Hands that had held a brother's face when he was scared and ironed a sister's school uniform every single night. Not one of Vivian's reasons had anything to do with who he was. They were all about what he had, what he represented, what he looked like from the outside. And in that moment, sitting in a restaurant that cost more than Ada's monthly rent, he knew. He didn't decide. He knew. The way you know that water is wet. The way you know which direction is down. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. He was still fighting it, still trying to convince himself that the sensible choice was the right choice. His mother wanted this wedding.
His family wanted this wedding. 200 people had RSVP'd. The cake had been ordered. The champagne had been imported. Walking away from all of that would mean walking away from the life everyone expected him to live. It would mean choosing something nobody understood. But the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. Because 3 days later, Emmanuel heard something that made the decision for him. 3 days before the engagement party, Vivian came to Emmanuel's house with her mother. They were discussing seating arrangements. Emmanuel was in his study upstairs, on a phone call, when he heard voices in the kitchen. Vivian and her mother didn't know he could hear them. The study window was open, and the kitchen window was directly below. Vivian's mother said, "Have you looked at the prenuptial agreement?" Vivian laughed. "Mama, please. There's not going to be a prenuptial agreement. I'll make sure of that." Her mother said, "Good, because once you're married, half of everything is yours. That's the law." Vivian said, "I know, Mama. Why do you think I said yes?" Emmanuel stood at the window. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He felt the words land in his chest like stones dropping into still water. One by one. "Why do you think I said yes?" He pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself. Below him, he heard Vivian and her mother laughing. A light, easy laugh. The laugh of two people who think they've gotten away with something. He thought about Ada, about her hands, rough from washing pots, about her slippers worn thin at the heel, about the way she had told that old man to take the food and pay next time, about the way she had looked at Emmanuel, not at his watch, not at his shoes, not at his name, just at him. And then he thought about Vivian, about her camera smile, about the way she checked her phone during dinner, about the way she said, "I love you," the same way she said, "Pass the salt," casually, without weight, like words that cost nothing because they meant nothing. 6 words. Why do you think I said yes? 6 words and 20 years of his father's voice in his head. A woman who feeds you when you have nothing. And he knew exactly what he had to do. He knew it the way you know the sun is going to rise. Not because someone told you, because you can feel it. But this story is far from over. The engagement party was on a Saturday evening. The ballroom at the Eco Hotel was decorated like something out of a fairy tale. White flowers everywhere, gold ribbons draped from pillar to pillar, crystal chandeliers throwing small rainbows across the ceiling. The tables were set with white linen and gold-rimmed plates. A 12-piece band played soft, high-life music from a raised stage in the corner. Waiters in black vests moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and small chops, puff-puff, spring rolls, suya on tiny wooden sticks. The whole room smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers and money. 200 guests filled the space. Politicians in flowing agbada, business leaders in tailored suits, society women in their finest lace and aso-oke, dripping with gold jewelry, their gele head ties reaching toward the chandeliers like elaborate sculptures. These were the people who ran Lagos, the people who made phone calls that moved markets, the people who measured your worth by the car you drove and the company you kept. And tonight, every single one of them was here for Emmanuel Okafor. Mama Okafor was in the front row, seated on a chair that had been specially upholstered in purple velvet for the occasion. She wore a purple and gold wrapper with matching gele and enough gold jewelry to weigh down a lesser woman. She was glowing, beaming. This was the night she had been praying for since Emmanuel turned 30. Her son was finally settling down. Her son was marrying well. God was good. Vivian stood at the center of the room in a champagne-colored designer gown, strapless, floor-length, with crystals sewn along the neckline that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant updo. Diamond earrings, real ones, not costume, hung from her ears. She looked like a queen. Everyone said so. Women whispered compliments, men stared. She was, by every measure that this room understood, perfection. Emmanuel arrived at 7:15. He was wearing a dark blue agbada, hand-embroidered, the finest fabric, chosen by Mama Okafor herself. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His cufflinks were gold, a gift from Vivian's father. He walked into the ballroom and every head turned. People clapped. Someone shouted, "The man of the hour!" A photographer's flash went off. Then another. Vivian smiled at him from across the room. The camera smile, the magazine cover smile, the smile that said nothing and meant less. Emmanuel walked to the front of the room. He didn't stop to shake hands. He didn't stop to smile for photographs. He walked past the cake, 5 tiers tall, white and gold, so large it had its own table, past the band, past the champagne fountain, past everything, straight to the center of the room where the microphone was waiting. The band stopped playing. The room got quiet. 200 guests turned their faces toward him. Everyone expected a speech. Everyone expected him to take Vivian's hand, say something about love and partnership and destiny, and slide a ring onto her perfect finger. Emmanuel looked out at the crowd. He saw his mother. He saw Vivian. He saw 200 faces waiting for him to perform. And then he said, clearly and calmly, "I am not marrying her." The room went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses on your eardrums. Mama Okafor's smile froze on her face. Vivian's eyes went wide. Someone in the back dropped a glass. "Emmanuel," Vivian said, her voice tight, "what are you doing?" Emmanuel looked at her. Not with anger, not with cruelty, with something that looked almost like sadness. "Vivian, you are a beautiful woman, and you deserve a man who loves you for who you are. But I am not that man, and you, with respect, you are not marrying me for who I am either. You told your mother that you said yes because of what I have. I heard you, 3 days ago, through the kitchen window." Vivian's face went from shock to fury to panic in the space of 3 seconds. Her hands clenched at her sides. Her perfectly painted lips trembled. Her mother, a tall woman in a gold aso oke, stood up from her chair so fast it scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. "How dare you?" Vivian whispered. Then louder, "How dare you do this to me, in front of everyone, in front of all these people?" Emmanuel looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry, Vivian. I am. But I would rather embarrass you tonight than lie to you for the rest of our lives. You deserve a man who loves you, and you deserve to love him back, for the right reasons. I hope you find that." Vivian's mother grabbed her daughter's arm. "We're leaving," she hissed. "We are leaving right now." She turned to Emmanuel and pointed a shaking finger at him. "You will regret this, Emmanuel Okafor. Mark my words." Emmanuel said nothing. He just watched them go. Vivian in her champagne gown, her mother in her gold wrapper, walking through the silent ballroom past 200 frozen faces. The band was still holding their instruments. The cake stood untouched on its table. The champagne was going flat in the glasses. Mama Okafor was gripping the arm of her seat with both hands. Her lips were pressed so tight they had gone pale. She looked at Emmanuel with eyes that were equal parts fury and fear. The look of a mother who doesn't know whether her son has lost his mind or finally found it. "Emmanuel," she said, her voice shaking. "What have you done?" Emmanuel walked over to her and knelt down, right there in front of everyone, and he took her hands. "Mama," he said quietly, "you married Papa because he was a bricklayer who had nothing. You married him because he was kind and honest, and he made you laugh. You didn't marry him for his money. You didn't marry him for his name. You married him because when you looked at him, You saw a man worth standing beside. That's what Papa always told me. And I believe him." Mama Okafor's eyes filled with tears, her lips pressed together. She didn't say anything. "I found someone, Mama," Emmanuel said. "She's not a model. She's not from a wealthy family. She sells jollof rice in Yaba Market. And she gave a hungry old man a free plate of food without thinking twice. And when I sat at her table in my old clothes and my borrowed car, she treated me like I mattered. Not because of what I had, because of who I was." He paused. Then he said the line that would echo through that ballroom for years to come. "A woman who sees you when you have nothing, that is the woman who will see you when you have everything. And a woman who only sees what you have, she will leave the day it's gone." The room was still. Vivian was standing alone in her champagne gown, tears running down her face. Not sad tears, angry ones. Her mother was pulling at her arm, whispering, "Let's go." The band was frozen. The guests were staring. Emmanuel stood up. He kissed his mother on the forehead. He walked across the ballroom, past the flowers and the gold ribbons and the crystal chandeliers, and he walked out the door. He didn't look back. He got into his small black Toyota, and he drove to Yaba. Now what happened after that night is the part that stays with you. Ada was at home when Emmanuel knocked on her door. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. The hallway of the Face Me, I Face You building was dark. Only one fluorescent light working, flickering on and off like a dying heartbeat. The walls were painted a shade of green that had faded to the color of old leaves. A baby was crying somewhere down the hall. A television was playing loud Nollywood dialogue from behind a closed door. Emmanuel stood in that hallway in his embroidered agbada and gold cufflinks, looking like a man from another planet. Grace answered the door, a thin, 16-year-old girl in her school uniform, which she was still wearing because she had been studying at the table. She looked at Emmanuel. She looked at his agbada. She looked at his shoes. Then she looked at his face with the flat, unimpressed expression that only a Nigerian teenager can produce. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Emmanuel. I'm a friend of your sister." Grace didn't move from the doorway. She folded her arms. What kind of friend comes to somebody's house at 9 o'clock at night in a costume? "Grace!" Ada's voice came from inside. "Who is at the door?" Grace turned her head and yelled, without taking her eyes off Emmanuel. "Ada! Some rich man is here looking for you." Ada came to the door. She was wearing a house dress, the faded one she wore after work, the one with the small hole near the hem that she kept meaning to fix. Rubber slippers. Her scarf was half untied, coming loose on one side. She had cooking oil on her hands and a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked at Emmanuel, standing in her hallway in his engagement party agbada, and her eyes went wide. "What are you doing here?" she said. "I just walked out of my own engagement party," Emmanuel said. Ada stared at him. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You did what?" "I told 200 people and a woman in a designer gown that I am not marrying her because the person I want to be with is standing in front of me right now, with cooking oil on her hands." Ada didn't swoon. She didn't cry. She didn't fall into his arms. She folded her arms across her chest and said, "Emmanuel, you don't even know me. I know that you wake up at 4:30 every morning. I know that you pay your brother's school fees and your sister's school fees, and you've never complained about it once. I know that you give food to people who can't pay because you think that's just what people do. I know that you hum church songs when you wash your pots. And I know that sitting on your wooden bench eating jollof rice is the happiest I have been in 15 years. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I'm asking you to let me earn your trust." Ada looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You can start by helping me wash these pots." Emmanuel took off his agbada. He rolled up his sleeves. He walked into her tiny kitchen, picked up a sponge, and started scrubbing. Grace watched from the doorway with her arms folded, shaking her head. "This one is definitely crazy," she muttered. Ada smiled. It was the first time Emmanuel had made her smile, and he decided right then that he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing it.
What Emmanuel was about to learn would change everything he believed about what it means to be rich. The next 3 months were the hardest of Emmanuel's life, and he had been through hard before. He had buried his father. He had built a company from nothing. He had survived business deals that nearly broke him. But nothing had prepared him for the silence from his mother. Mama Okafor didn't speak to Emmanuel for 5 weeks. She didn't answer his calls. She didn't reply to his messages. She told his cousin to tell him that he had broken her heart and embarrassed the Okafor name in front of the whole of Lagos. She said he had lost his mind.
She said the jollof rice had poisoned him. She said she wished his father was alive to talk some sense into him.
Emmanuel didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't try to explain. He just called her every morning at 7 o'clock and every evening at 8 o'clock. The phone would ring and go to voicemail, and he would say the same thing. "Good morning, Mama. I love you. I'll call again tonight." Or, "Good evening, Mama. I hope you ate well today. I love you. I'll call again in the morning." After 3 weeks, she started picking up. She didn't say much. Sometimes just, sometimes just breathing. But she picked up. And that was progress. After 5 weeks, she said her first full sentence. "You are a stubborn boy." Emmanuel smiled into the phone. "I got it from you, Mama." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell, but it was something. He introduced Ada to his mother on a Sunday afternoon in November.
Emmanuel drove Ada to Mama Okafor's house in a quiet neighborhood in Ikeja. Ada was nervous. Emmanuel could tell because she kept smoothing her wrapper and checking her reflection in the car mirror, which was something she never normally did. She was wearing her best outfit, a clean Ankara dress in blue and white, simple gold earrings that Chidi had sent her from Benin City as a birthday gift, and her hair neatly braided in cornrows. She'd spent the entire previous evening cooking. She brought a pot of jollof rice, her best recipe, the one with the perfectly burnt bottom and the secret ingredient she wouldn't tell anyone about. "What if she doesn't like me?" Ada asked in the car. "Then I'll still choose you," Emmanuel said. "That's not what I asked." "I know, but it's the only answer that matters." Ada looked at him. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Park the car. Let's go." Mama Okafor was sitting in her living room like a judge on a high bench. She was wearing a simple house wrapper, no gold, no ceremony, which was somehow more intimidating than her finest outfit. She had a glass of water on the side table. She was watching a Nollywood movie with the volume turned low. When Emmanuel and Ada walked in, she picked up the remote, turned off the television, and looked at Ada the way a jeweler looks at a stone, searching for flaws, testing for authenticity, measuring worth. Ada set the pot on the dining table. She walked over to Mama Okafor, knelt down, both knees on the ground, the way a respectful Igbo woman greets an elder, and said, "Good afternoon, Ma. My name is Adeze. I brought food for you." Mama Okafor looked down at her. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She said, "Stand up. Sit down. Let me look at you." Ada sat. Mama Okafor looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "So you are the one who is selling jollof rice and stealing my son." Ada didn't flinch. "I'm not stealing him, Ma. I'm just feeding him. He keeps coming back on his own." Something flickered across Mama Okafor's face. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. It disappeared quickly. "We'll see," Mama Okafor said. "We'll see." She didn't touch the jollof rice that day. Not one spoonful. She said she had already eaten. Emmanuel knew she was lying. Her glass of water was the only thing on the side table. But he didn't push. He drove Ada home that evening and she was quiet the whole way. "She hates me," Ada said. "She doesn't know you yet," Emmanuel said. "Give her time." "How much time?" "As much as she needs." But the next Sunday, when Ada came back with a different pot, this time pepper soup with goat meat, thick and fragrant and so peppery it made the whole house smell like fire, Mama Okafor took one spoonful. She let it sit on her tongue. She swallowed. She took another spoonful. Then she looked at Ada and said, "The pepper is too much." Ada nodded.
I'll reduce it next time, Ma.
And Mama Okafor, for the first time in 5 weeks of silence and cold shoulders and slammed doors, almost smiled. Just a small twitch at the corner of her mouth. Gone as fast as it came. But Emmanuel saw it. And Ada saw it. And they both knew, they both felt it in their bones, that the worst part was over. It took time. It took patience. It took Ada showing up every Sunday without fail, rain or heat, with a different dish and the same quiet respect. Mama Okafor tested her. She tested her the way only a Nigerian mother can. She criticized the food. She criticized Ada's wrapper. She asked pointed questions about Ada's family, her education, her plans. Ada answered every question honestly, without defensiveness, without trying to be something she wasn't. When Mama Okafor said, "You didn't go to university?" Ada said, "No, Ma, I didn't. I was raising my brother and sister." She said it simply, not with shame, not with pride, just truth. It took Mama Okafor watching Ada interact with Grace and seeing how Grace looked at her sister with total trust, total admiration, the way a child looks at someone who has never once let them down. It took Mama Okafor visiting Ada's stall in Yaba one afternoon. She showed up unannounced in a taxi wearing a plain wrapper and a headscarf so nobody would recognize her. She sat on the wooden bench. She ordered a plate of rice. She watched Ada work for 2 hours. She watched Ada give a plate of food to a pregnant woman who was counting coins and coming up short. She watched Ada argue with a supplier who was trying to cheat her on the price of tomatoes and win the argument. She watched Ada clean up a mess that a child had made on the floor, then give the child's mother a bag of chin-chin and say, "For the road." She watched Ada work like a woman who had been carrying the world on her shoulders since she was 19 years old and had never once asked anyone to carry it for her.
That evening, Mama Okafor called Emmanuel. Her voice was different, softer, like the hard edge had been filed down. She said, "That girl reminds me of myself, when I was young, before I had all this, before your father made his money, when I used to cook for him on a kerosene stove and wash his clothes by hand." She paused, and then she said, "She is a good woman, Emmanuel. She is a good woman." That was all she said, but it was enough. It was more than enough. 6 months later, Emmanuel and Ada were married. It was a small ceremony. 50 guests, a church in Surulere with wooden pews and ceiling fans that wobbled when they spun. Plastic chairs outside for the overflow. A cake from a local bakery, 2 tiers, white icing, a little lopsided on the left side. The pastor was an old man with a deep voice who had known Emmanuel's father. He cried during the vows. Grace was the maid of honor. She wore a lavender dress that Ada had saved 3 months to buy. She stood beside her sister and held the rings and tried not to cry, and failed. Chidi came home from school for the weekend and wore a suit he had borrowed from a classmate. The sleeves were too short and the pants were too long, but he stood straight and proud and shook Emmanuel's hand like a man. Mama Okafor sat in the front row in a simple blue wrapper. No gold, no elaborate jewelry, no jewelry that could fill a shop. Just blue fabric, a quiet smile, and pride in her eyes that shone brighter than any diamond. Ada wore a white dress that a tailor in Yaba had made for 3,000 naira. It was simple, no beading, no train, no designer label. But the way it fit her, the way she smiled when she walked down the aisle, the way her eyes found Emmanuel's face and stayed there. She looked beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful that belongs on magazine covers or fashion runways or billboards in Victoria Island. The kind of beautiful that belongs in a home. The kind that lasts. After the wedding, Emmanuel moved Ada and Grace into the Ikoyi house. The first morning, Ada woke up at 5 o'clock, old habits don't die, and went to the kitchen. She found Blessing already there, slicing onions. They looked at each other. 2 women in one kitchen. Ada smiled first. "Let me show you something," she said. She pulled out her battered aluminum pot, the same one she had cooked with in the market,
and set it on the 6-burner stove that cost more than her entire food stall. She started making jollof rice. Blessing watched, at first with suspicion, then with curiosity, then with her mouth open. "How do you get the bottom to burn like that without burning the rest?" Blessing asked. Ada grinned. "Low heat, patience, and you have to talk to it." "Talk to it?" "Yes, tell the rice it's doing a good job. Works every time." Blessing laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from surprise. And from that morning on, they cooked together, side by side. Two women who came from different worlds, standing at the same stove, making food for the same family. The house changed. It didn't smell like air freshener anymore. It smelled like stew simmering on the stove and chin-chin frying in oil and fresh bread cooling on the counter. There were rubber slippers by the front door. There was music playing from the kitchen, gospel music, loud, with Ada singing along and getting half the words wrong. Grace's school books were spread across the dining table. The cushions on the sofa were crooked because people actually sat on them. One evening, about a year after the wedding, Emmanuel came home from work and found Ada and Grace in the living room. Grace was sitting on the floor, eating jollof rice from a plastic plate. Ada was on the sofa, her feet tucked under her, watching a movie. The room was warm and messy and loud. Ada looked up and said, "There's food on the stove. Wash your hands." Emmanuel stood in the doorway. He looked at the crooked cushions. He looked at the school books on the table. He looked at the rubber slippers by the door. And he felt something he hadn't felt in that house in 5 years of living there. He felt home. Grace looked up at him with rice on her chin and said, "Oh, Guy Emmanuel, your wife burnt the plantain again." Ada threw a cushion at her. "I did not burn it. It's extra crispy." Emmanuel laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and fills the whole room and makes the walls feel warmer. And he thought about his father, about a bricklayer from Onitsha who married a woman who brought him food when he had nothing. And he understood, finally, what the old man had been trying to tell him all along. A year later, Ada gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Patrick, after Emmanuel's father. He was born at 3 a.m, screaming loud enough to wake up the entire hospital floor. Emmanuel held him for the first time, and his hands were shaking so badly that the nurse had to help him. Ada watched from the bed, exhausted and smiling, and said, "Don't drop him." "I won't," Emmanuel whispered. "I will never drop him." Grace came to the hospital the next morning. She walked in, looked at the baby, and said very seriously, "He has your nose, Ada. Sorry about that." Ada threw a pillow at her. Grace caught it, laughed, sat down on the edge of the bed, and held her nephew's tiny hand. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice that was suddenly not joking at all, "He's going to have the best life, because you're his mother, and you're the best person I know." Ada started crying. Grace started crying. Emmanuel stood in the corner holding a cup of cold tea, trying not to cry and failing completely. Mama Okafor arrived an hour later with a pot of pepper soup and 3 bags of baby clothes. She took one look at her grandson, picked him up, held him against her chest, and said, "This one looks like his grandfather. He is going to be trouble." And for the first time in Emmanuel's memory, his mother laughed at the same time. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Emmanuel sat in a chair beside Ada's hospital bed. The baby was sleeping in a plastic crib next to them. The room was quiet. The hallway lights were dim. Ada reached over and took Emmanuel's hand. "Are you happy?" she asked. Emmanuel looked at her. He looked at the baby. He looked at their hands, tangled together on the white hospital sheet. And he said, "I didn't know this was possible. I didn't know any of this was possible." Ada squeezed his hand. "It was always possible," she said. "You just had to come sit on the right bench. You don't find love in a ballroom. You don't find it in a designer gown or a champagne glass or a prenuptial agreement. You find it on a wooden bench, on a dusty street corner, in a plate of jollof rice handed to a stranger who couldn't pay. You find it in the person who sees you. Not your name, not your car, not your house, but you, the person underneath all of it.
the person you are when nobody is watching. And if you are lucky enough to find that person, you hold on. You hold on with both hands, and you don't let go. Not for your mother, not for society, not for 200 guests and a 12-piece band, because all of that will fade. But the woman who feeds you when you have nothing, she stays forever. I hope this story stays with you for a while. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what you would have done differently. We love reading your thoughts. Until next time.